Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ancient Warfare Podcast. My name is Jasper Orthuis. I'm the editor of the magazine, and with me today are Mark with a C DeSantis, Murray Dam, the assistant editor of Ancient Warfare, Lindsay Powell, and Mark with a K McCaffrey, who are regular contributors to the podcast. And we don't discuss a recent issue today, but we had a question I think that was meant for Ancient Warfare Answers. If you listen to this podcast, then you will know that we do a weekly, or Murray does a weekly podcast of only about 10 minutes, in which he discusses questions that keep the readers up at night about warfare in the ancient world. And one of those we just got this week or last week, and we thought, oh, that might be just a great one to just while away an hour or so. And the question, Murray, do you have the person who asked it?
Oh, do I? I think I got so annoyed that it wasn't going to be just me that I don't know if I saved it in my Ancient Warfare Answers document.
Well,
so
we
basically,
we can just say what the question
yeah,
was.
yeah.
Basically, if there was a way to observe an ancient battle, with a drone or fly on the wall at the commander's conference before the battle and looking over his shoulder while it happened, maybe even with different camera views, like in Total War. Which ones would you like to visit? And that was just, we started talking before the podcast, and we already had a wish list, and everybody goes, "Oh yes, that's a good one." So I think I'm just going to kick off with Mark with a C. Mark, which ones would you like to be present for or have been present for?
These are my mystery battles of antiquity, because watching all of them, each to be able to view them would answer some sort of question I have about them. As it counting down from number 5, Siege of Troy, roughly 1200 BC. What did the Siege of Troy, which is generally considered to be historical to some extent, though obviously legendary in terms of the Iliad poem that was written about it. What was it actually like? Was it a true formal siege? Was it more of a constant series of raids against this one strategically placed city? Was there a link to the migration of the sea peoples who actually took part in this siege? Number 4, it's the Battle of the Talents Valley. So this is another Bronze Age battle, taking place roughly around 1300 BC in the German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Nothing survives in terms of written work about this, but maybe 3,000 to 5,000 combatants took part in this battle, and one side may have been from the Urnfield culture, another from the Lusatian culture, migrating westward from Central Eastern Europe. What actually happened in this battle? Who were the combatants? How were they armed? What did they look like? Be fascinating to know why they were even fighting. It was probably a migration of some sort. Number 3 for me is the Battle of Kadesh, dated to 1274 BC. This took place on the Orontes River on the modern Lebanon-Syria border. The largest chariot battle of the ancient world, with so many chariots. That's be fascinating in and of itself. But also what we have in terms of information about the battle comes from Ramses II, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and how honest he was about what happened. That would be fascinating to know if you could actually see, what unfolded. Number 2, the Battle of Mylae. So now we're in the Iron Age, 260 BC. It's the First Punic War. The Romans are engaging the Carthaginians in one of the early naval battles. It was the first deployment of the weapon known as the corvus. It was a boarding bridge. It was essentially a gangplank with a spike at the end, but it's mysterious because how it was actually deployed is not well known. There are many theories, but none of them are really proven. If I could see it actually deployed, then that would be fascinating to know not only how it operated, but how effective it was, because the typical take on the corvus is that once the Romans used it against the Carthaginians, they won all of their naval battles. I would like to know why. And lastly, It's the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. That was AD 9. And the reason why I chose that, apart from the fact that destruction of 3 German legions, their attendant auxiliary formations, it may have very well stopped Roman expansion for good at the Rhine. But for me, even more importantly, is we could know where it took place. That is, typically it's now regarded to have taken place in Calcresa, but if I had the ability to get an aerial view, maybe I would actually be able to pinpoint it via GPS and tell everyone this is where to look. So those are my top 5.
Just to add real quick, we're just going to go, everybody do a quick list, and then afterward we'll just, maybe discuss our number ones and see. We have some listener suggestions as well, and see if we all agree, or if there would be, if we had to pick one. Oh, that'd be so difficult. Who would like to go next?
So I'm just going to give 2 because it's in the interest of time. The Battle of Pharsalus, 9th of August, 48 BC, between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. It's a pivotal battle because it really decides the fate of the Respublica, right? With the victory of Caesar over Pompey and his withdrawal and finally retreat to Egypt, it leaves Caesar the man standing. So what are the mechanics of the battle? There are several sources, and if you put them together in a layer cake, it sort of makes sense. But there are important details which are missing in each of the sources. So what really happened? But the crux of the issue for me, I think, is to address the question: if Pompey had 45,000 troops and Julius Caesar supposedly had half that number, 22,000. Why didn't Pompey, when he saw the weakness, get down to where the problem was and deal with it? Which was exactly what you would expect a general, and that's what certainly Caesar did. But Pompey just basically retreats, sealing his fate. So I think that's important. The consequence of that is effectively you leave a man solely in charge of the Roman Republic, and eventually he becomes dictator, and ultimately he is assassinated. And then that leads me into his successor, which of course is made at the Battle of Actium, which is the battle which changed the Res Publica in its last vestige, you could argue, into an imperial system. And the interesting thing there is how the mechanics of the battle actually took place. It's a naval battle. Pharsalus is a land infantry battle. I'm fascinated to know what the number of ships are, because there's scholars constantly arguing, is it 250, is it 300, whatever it is. Did the Egyptian ships really look as gleaming and glorious as they're made out to be? And what was Marcus Antonius's battle plan? There's some division amongst scholars that he always planned to escape, in which case that's pretty mean, because there's 19 legions, some tens of thousands of legionaries left abandoned in Epirus. On the other hand, if he was actually planning to fight and win the battle, there's a turning point at which he abandons the plan and jumps on Cleopatra's ship, or at least a ship in pursuit. The outcome of that battle on the morning of the 3rd of September 31 BC is that now leaves effectively Octavian is at that point in a position of immense strength, that he will ultimately turn that in 27 BC into this effectively a monarch. And it was possible because of that battle.
Murray.
So mine range the widest spread in terms of years. I'd like to see what happened at the Catalonian Plains, and like Mark with a C said, where the location of that battle is lots of places claim it, but to see exactly what happened with Flavius Aetius and Attila the Hun's armies, how big they were. The sources are telling us it's 500,000 men and 300,000 casualties, which is enormous and probably not true at all. Exactly what happened in terms of who didn't fight, who did, who broke who, what happened. That would be a fascinating battle. Battle of Adrianople also fought on the 9th of August, but it's not a black day, which is interesting. The 9th of August should be a black day because it's fought on the same day as the Battle of Pharsalus. And that, of course, is in 378 AD, the battle where the Goths under Fritigern have invaded the Roman Empire 2 years earlier, crossing over the Danube. And then they go on the rampage and are unstoppable. And then, of course, the Emperor Valens comes and fights them by himself, coming back from Antioch, and loses the entire Eastern Roman army, which has great ramifications for the Roman Empire, especially in the East afterwards. And then I would also like to see Marathon, the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, September 490 BC, where the Athenians go out alone to face the invading Persian army. Again, how many? We often bandy around the term 10,000 men, but the fact is that doesn't come from Herodotus. He doesn't give us that number. Cornelius Nepos gives us the number, which is like, wait, what? So how many were there? How did they organize? Yeah, exactly. The idea of how did a phalanx, especially an Athenian phalanx, get organized? What were the taxae? What were the lochoi? All of those things in an Athenian army. That would be great, because we don't know how those actually work. Let alone how did a phalanx operate? That's something else we don't know, which would be something that's great to see. And I was thought about that whilst you guys were talking, going, well, it would be great to see a triple line of Hastati, Principes, and Triarii in operation. So the Battle of Cannae, not only because it's an important battle, but just to see how that formation operated, how they interchanged, how they swapped out, which is what we're told in the sources. You know, it's similarly at Marathon that you could see the Athysmos actually happen if there was one. Modern scholarship decides that there is no Athysmos, but the ancient Greek sources talk about this push. Why would a push be called a push if it wasn't a push? And then I also had the idea that I was talking about, wouldn't it be great to see a battle, not one where we don't know what happened, but one where we think we do know what happened, like the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BC, or the Battle of even Gaugamela, Alexander the Great, in 331 BC, where we think we know where everyone stood and we think we know what happened, and basically go, did that happen? Oh, no, it's completely different. Oh, we've been lied to for millennia by all these sources who we normally don't trust, and then we do trust them for this one instant, and we shouldn't have. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I started making lists then of other battles. No mention of Kynoscephalae or Pydna. The Battle of the Allia would be great to know. So many. Leuctra. Oh.
It becomes an encyclopedia.
All of them.
The three that I've picked, I'm going to start with Alexander. Has already been mentioned, but in terms of Alexander, I think we can pretty much say Alexander has got that signature move in his battles in terms of his sweeping cavalry, and I'd turn to the Granicus in 334 in terms of his first major battle against the Persian forces, or at least the western satrapies of Persia, and that lining out of what you might consider to be the pure Alexandrian Macedonian army before it starts getting augmented by other forces being brought in as he continues his campaigns, and also starts adapting to the different forces that he faces as he moves east. So in terms of seeing, my main thought on this is looking at the companion cavalry sweeping across the river, and the river plays a big part in this, although looking at modern photos of the landscape, was there such a big rise in the bank of the river where Alexander's attacking up? How much of a defense did the Persians have? It's taking their position on the top of that rise. Why were the Persian cavalry put in front of the infantry? It's all those little questions, but at the same time, it is seeing the pure Alexandrian move of that sweeping cavalry coming across the river and, how can I say, rolling up the edge of the Persian line. At the same time, you've also got that great scene of Alexander being, well, he's always in mortal danger, but he faces a moment where we've got three different accounts of it, but one way or another, he is under attack, and it's only the intervention of Clytus Black coming in to save his life, which comes in later on and is held against poor old Clytus. But again, it's a momentous instant in Alexander's career. For the second one, I'm going to turn to a great defeat, really, in terms of the Arusio battle in October 105 for the Romans. This involves the Cimbrian Teutones, who are a migratory group coming down, we think, from somewhere like Denmark. There's lots of argument exactly where they originate from, but over the course of a couple of decades, they migrate back and forth across Europe, coming into contact with the Romans in 113 in what is later referred to as Noricum. And in that contact, the initial contact, which Papirius Carbo goes to deal with because they come into conflict with some of Rome's amici at Socii, their allies in the north. Carbo goes to supposedly deal with it and really gives them a bit of a runaround, supposedly heads them in the wrong direction, straight into what he plans to be an ambush, and of course it backfires on him massively. And then you've got, over the course of the next few years, 109 and 107, you've also got, again, the Teutones and the Cimbri coming into contact with Roman armies, and one time after another, they are getting the rough treatment by the Romans, but weirdly enough, they don't take advantage of their victories over the Romans. They don't follow it up by a mass invasion of Italy. In each time, they actually turn away, moving back into Gaul or across into Spain. But eventually that leads to 105, and the Romans are seeing them coming prospectively into Italy. And of course, they once again send up not one, but two consular armies to deal with this threat up on the Rhone River. Again, what do the Cimbri and the Teutones want? They are asking apparently for land in return for service. And again, the Romans don't trust them, or at least don't want to let the barbarians in. And again, you've got the threat, which is dealt with by these two consular armies. But of course, they're led by two consuls who, one is, of course, a novus homo, one is coming from a good aristocratic background, and they can't see eye to eye. And eventually, their arguments lead to the two of them refusing to work together. And of course, what I'd like to see in this battle in particular, the two armies are apparently driven into the river itself. Some of the sources state it is all-out annihilation. Some sources are saying 80,000, some are saying 66,000. There is one source, Orosius, is saying 10 people survive, and of course that's the interesting one with apparently Sertorius, who I'll mention in a moment, young up-and-coming star of Roman military, jumps across into the Rhone River and swims in full armour across the river to escape. So that'd be an interesting one to see. The main one I'd love to see would actually be the Siege of Lauron, which happens in 76, I should say 76 BCE. Of course, we've already mentioned Pompey today. Pompey at this stage is the young whippersnapper. He is full of confidence. He is known popularly as the Carnifex Ordilascens, the young butcher at this stage. And he's earned that name in the Civil War, when he's conquered enemy armies in the Civil War through treachery and through just sheer bloody-mindedness, putting to death enemy leaders. So Carbo, Domitius Henneborus, and also Brutus, as in father of the guy who later everybody knows. Of course, Pompey, after the Civil War has come to an end, is a little bit of a loose cannon. And of course, at the same time, there is also, after the Civil War, the situation of Sertorius. Sertorius has been on the Marian faction in the Civil War between Marius and Sulla, I should have said. And of course, he has taken what forces he can collect and gone to effectively establish a rebel senate and a rebel government in exile in Spain. And he's doing this quite successfully, and it is causing the Senate back in Rome to really think about what they can do. They've already sent Metellus Pius to deal with it, but he's being given the runaround by Sertorius. Sertorius is a really good, effective leader, and at the same time, unlike most Roman leaders, he has got an ability to identify with those allied and native perspectives, and so therefore he can work with forces not Roman, but also integrate them into a Roman looking approach to warfare. Now, of course, Pompey is the loose cannon, and the Senate back in Rome decide, well, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's send Pompey to Spain. Either way, it's going to be a great thing, because either way, one, Pompey might go and be victorious, and so therefore Sertorius and his rebel group are knocked out. On the other hand, the young whippersnapper Pompey might actually be taught a lesson by Sertorius, and he might not come back. Or they might just, annihilate each other into the ground. So one way or another, the Senate decided this is a great thing and send him off to Spain. Sertorius, when Pompey arrives, this leads to a number of the cities starting to go over to Pompey and Metellus, and Sertorius decides that he needs to, in the words of Plutarch, teach the young boy a lesson. And so he decides that Lauron is going to be the place. This is a city something like 50 miles in some direction away from Valencia. Pompey knows that this is going to be a target. They both go for the city. Sertorius arrives first. He sets up his siege of the city. Pompey arrives shortly after, and they both see that outside of the city there is a hill that's in a very strategically advantageous position. They both go for it, but Sertorius gets it and sets up his camp on that hill. Pompey, however, sets up his camp so that he's got Sertorius between him and the city. He thinks he's got him pinned, and he thinks this is going to be a wonderful example of how he, the young up-and-coming star, is going to show and teach a lesson to this old guy. He even sends a message to the people in Lauron saying, set up your deck chairs on the walls and please enjoy the show. Sertorius is not that stupid. Sertorius knows that Pompey wants him to come out and fight, but Sertorius is going to do it his way in his time. And he waits. Of course, both armies were not given any figures in terms of the armies and the size at all, but they're big armies and they need to be supplied, of course. And Pompey's army goes out to fetch supplies, and Sertorius is strategic about this. He makes sure that anytime Pompey's forces go out to collect supplies from the nearer areas, they're harried by cavalry. And when they go out to fetch supplies from further away areas, then they are left alone. So Pompey's forces eventually learn where they should be going to collect their supplies. Unfortunately, this leads Sertorius into a wonderful situation. He sends out a force made up of 10 of his infantry cohorts, 10 of his Iberian cohorts, which they're described as light, but actually they're not that much lighter than a legionary. They're made up of these guys called Scutari. And then he's got 2,000 cavalry, which he sends out. And this group is sent out to set up an ambush. Roughly a legion of men are out foraging for supplies from Pompey's force, and overnight they've gone out. In the morning they're on their way back, laden with everything that they've collected, when all of a sudden they are hit initially by the Iberian forces. They hit them in the rear. Panic spreads through the group. They charge forward, disrupting the rest of their group, and in the process, they are hit from the sides by the legionaries. Soon after, as panic really ensues, they are hit by half of the cavalry that Sertorius has sent out. This basically annihilates this legionary-sized group of foragers. At the same time, Sertorius has also ordered for half of his cavalry that was in the ambush to rush ahead and go towards the area of Pompey's camp and then circle back, and so that anybody who survived and escaped from the initial ambush runs straight into the cavalry. This leads to pretty much all of them being annihilated. There's a few that get away, and they get back to Pompey's camp. Pompey thinks it's a small ambush initiated by some of the cavalry of Sertorius. He sends out one legion in response. This legion rushes forward, encounters the cavalry turn and run, and the legion thinks they've got them on the run, advance. They advance straight into the heavy infantry of the legions of Sertorius, and of course are annihilated. Pompey, at this point, starts getting the idea that something more is afoot, and gets his entire army on the move, leaving camp to go to the rescue. Only one problem is that as soon as he moves, the entire army of Sertorius leaves its camp. And so Pompey is in this predicament where he is stuck. If he goes to the rescue of what's left of effectively 2 legions of men, he will be attacked in the rear. If, on the other hand, he turns and faces Sertorius, then the forces that have attacked his 2 legions, if they finish them off, they can then turn and hit him in the side as well. So he is effectively in a position where either way he is going to lose. He ends up having to stand there and watch his 2 legions get annihilated, also knowing that he now can't go out and forage for supplies, which he is desperately short of. In the end, he ends up having to make a tactical retreat away from Lauron, and of course Sertorius is given his lesson. It would be a wonderful sight to see.
Impressive. As someone that at least we know a lot about. I have found by now who has actually asked the question. So it's Brian Fraser. So thank you, Brian, for giving us something to talk about. I'll add mine. I've long been fascinated by the Assyrian reliefs of all their battles and many sieges. And as I'm sure many of us are, and I would just like to see some of those siege machines in action to see how they really work, and perhaps also what the proportions were from machine, city wall, person, because they might be a little distorted. I think that would be impressive sight. And for the other 2 battles, I'm going to say I'm going to go for naval battles because we've had some, but we know we have a really good idea of what an Athenian trireme might have looked like. The Olympias is a good reconstruction. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and they've experimented with it a lot, so we know how it performs, how it might maneuver. But just seeing a lot of them in action, that would be spectacular, I think. And I would like to be very interested in seeing that, and probably somewhere in the 5th century BC when Athens has its own rowers in peak condition and they can do all the fancy maneuvers, diekplus and periplus, and trying. I mean, that's how they say that one of the tactics would be to try and shear off the other ship's oars, which is quite, if you think about the construction of these ships, like how are you going to do that and not shear off your own oars and just sort of KO your own rowers or oarsmen in the process? That would be quite a feat. So if they could, demonstrate that at such a battle, that'd be interesting to see. But I think my number one would be very close to what Mark said in 256 BC, so also in the First Punic War, the Battle of Eknomos on the southern coast of Sicily, which is quite probably, I mean, of course, as has been a theme in these battles that have been suggested, numbers might be questionable, but whether it was 255 quinquiremes per side in this case, or 300, between 300 and 350, as Polybius suggests, it would be, if those were manned at what they're supposed to be, they were fully crewed, and in the case of the Romans, they also had an invasion army on them. This would have been a battle with, up to 250 to 300,000 men fighting, which would make it probably the biggest naval battle ever, at least in a small area of sea, and one of the biggest battles ever, period, until the very modern age. And even then, Waterloo doesn't get you there. So I think it would probably not have the fancy maneuverings that Athenian triremes could do, because these crews were not as well trained and the ships were bigger and heavier. But it would be a massive battle, and you would still see. Well, there are only 2 options in pretty much in ancient history until the introduction of catapults aboard ships. It's you ram the ship, or you board it, and then you use the corvus, as Mark already mentioned, which is still very much a Roman tactic at this time. So I think that would be interesting to see. I suggest now that we'll go over real quick the suggestions that some of the readers sent in. Let's see. Christopher Buckham suggested the Teutoburg Forest. Well, clearly great minds think alike there. Austerlitz and Nelsonian naval battles. I totally get the inclination, but since they're not ancient, at least not by our definition, I think we'll skip those. Megiddo, 1457 BC, because it's so early. Yeah, well, again, Mark clearly thought along the same lines. That was Michael Williams, actually. Kadesh, again. Gaugamela, Siege of Troy, and another more modern one, Malplaquet, which is the War of Spanish Succession. That would be interesting, but again, not very ancient. Listener chairman, Zama. Not that we nobody mentioned that. See the meeting between Hannibal and Scipio. Yes. Siege of Alesia would also be interesting. Actium. There we go. Erasmus Berger, another vote for Zama. Plataea. Again, how hoplite formations actually fought. And the Siege of Vienna, which is also interesting and important in world history. But again, not ancient. So
Plataea would be interesting because most of it happens in the dark, so you wouldn't see much.
well, I mean, we've already established that these drones of ours have, we can listen in on Mark Antony. We can establish their exact position, even though there are no satellites in orbit to determine GPS. I mean, I'm sure infrared
So
is just
Plataea
easy.
would look like one of those psyops modern films where you've got the green heat vision of all the hoplites moving in the dark.
Yeah.
You'd be like, I see them there. There they are. Yeah, that'd be very funny.
Well, I'm sure the hoplites might be actually grateful to have a slightly cooler temperatures to work in. I think if I got it right, Murray, was marathon indeed your number one? Or did you not have
See
a
now,
top?
as everyone's been talking, I've been adding to my list, which is very bad. I think I'm going to go with Adrianople as my number one. I think.
Okay. So that's
Mm,
we have a
mm,
bit better.
mm.
So we have Teutoburg Forest, Adrianople, Actium, the Siege of Lauron, and Eknomos. Then, if we had to pick one, be difficult. Does anybody want to vote? Or if we start talking about it, probably our list will just get
Well,
longer.
we'll move into a second episode. But what is the big ancient warfare question? Is it how the phalanx operated, how the legion operated, how the ships operated? What is the
Or
question?
is it that the fact of we're trying to expose misunderstandings and in fact what we've got, and I think this is why Active is interesting, we really only have Augustus's sympathizers that present the battle as being this pivotal one, right? So if in fact it wasn't that way, wouldn't that be interesting to find out?
It all comes down to sources again, because
Yes.
if you go to Rusio, of course, it's such a great big defeat for the Romans that our sources really don't want to talk about it. As as always with the Romans, they'll give
Yeah.
reams and reams
Pistol to the head, I'll tell
about
you something.
every statistic you want about their victories, but if it's a defeat, they'll say, they didn't come back, or they got prosecuted when they got home because they didn't come back with a legion or two or six. On the other hand, Sertorius is interesting because Sertorius, all of his career, we're getting from sources that are coming after his period, and so he is one of the rebels. He's a Marian in a sullen Senate and a sullen political scene in Rome. And even after him, people who are writing about him later on and mentioning him, people like Sallust or Cicero, who mention him for qualities that they are, philosophizing about. They're not praising him. He is the great. He's almost an enemy of Rome. He is, he's got the mark of an enemy. He's got one eye missing, which he says is apparently a mark of his honor and gravitas in battle. But on the other hand, when you go through who in Roman literature is missing an eye, it's all the enemies. It's the Hannibals of this world who are missing eyes because they are enemies of Rome. So these are interesting battles in terms of the situations that arise in them, be they consuls arguing with each other or, great generals telling each other they're going to give a lesson to each other. But on the other hand, it's all coming through Roman literature, which can it be trusted or not?
No, it can't be.
But it's interesting that you say that, and then on the list, we have two major Roman defeats.
Well, I think it's one of those things about when you look at the Greek phalanx, or when you look at the Macedonian and the Hellenistic phalanxes, and then the Roman legion, they're built up by the sources of that society to be undefeatable, and often they come down to the personal failings of the commander. The defeats are the fault of impiety, or Adrianople is not a Gothic victory according to the Roman sources. It's Valens was an Arian Christian and he was punished by God. You're like, wait, what? That doesn't answer any strategic questions. And so that excuse doesn't answer how did this amazing machinery that you've got lose? And I think the problem we have is that, because we haven't explored the amazing machinery on the other side. Where's that exploration? Well, they didn't write anything because we did eventually beat them, so they actually don't say anything. They just lost. You're like,
You want to see it.
Yeah.
I mean, most of those, you're saying we've got, going back to the two Roman defeats, most of the stuff about them is talking about, as Murray's saying, the consequences of it back in Rome, how it is received back in Rome. We don't get the details. Rusio, we get the greatest amount of detail is that the two consular armies are forced back into the river. We're missing exactly what actually happened in the battle, and in terms of the actual contact that's made in the battle. At one moment, the two consuls are saying, "I'm not going near you. You can fight alone," etc. Next thing, they're in the river. In terms of
it's like Monty and Patton, all over.
Well, so Livy presumably is writing about Orazio, right?
Yes.
And his focus on what's going back in Rome is also a commentary on the Roman society and how they turn to the temples and their gods because, how wrong can this get? Bad can this get? And in the case, I think, of Teutoburg, I think, again, you look at the sources and it's an interesting point in Augustus's reign where it sort of potentially can come undone. But then when you see it in the context, it was one of several defeats. I mean, there was also Lollius and his defeat in 1716 BC, which led ultimately to the Romans going into Germania in the first place. And there were many defeats, but this one just seems to actually have name recognition, if I can put it that way.
So no result. We're just going to have to beg, can we have
all
5 time machines or a couple
Sounds
more
good.
so we can just do a whole long list?
It's a Schrodinger's cat dilemma too, because if the Roman legions of the Greek hoplites look in the sky and see these things, that'll change the battle, right?
Oh no, yeah. Well, no, they'll interpret it as an eagle, so we're fine. We just have to dress up our drone as an eagle,
or as a comet.
I think the problem would be if we were given the opportunity for one. The problem would be just enjoy the one. You're like, no. I now want to think about and fixate on all the ones I didn't get to do. If I get to do the one, if we choose Kadesh, for instance, you're like, what about the Romans? What about the Assyrians? What about the Greeks?
Yeah. But it's like, do you want to confirm or falsify your sources, or do you want to pick one of those 3rd century BC battles where we know there's been a battle and that's it?
Right.
I want to see that one because then we can add something to it.
My suspicion is that if we were observers in the way that we've been describing, and you hinted at it there, Jasper, is the idea of the awfulness of the battlefield. I mean, this is butchery one-on-one, sharp blades chopping and pointy sticks stabbing and so forth. And one of the things I was thinking about in the Battle of Pharsalus, one of the techniques that Julius Caesar's troops was they aimed at the faces of Pompey's cavalry, because these were Eastern, and then the idea was they would be so shocked that they would be disfigured, they retreat. And that's what the bloody face of battle was. It was butchery. And then, of course, then there are these bodies and, arms and limbs and all the rest of it. Just awful. I mean, we have footage of the First World War and see how awful that looks. Just imagine seeing it in color.
You have got the description of the Battle of Orazio in terms of the locals say that there is a benefit to it in terms of their fields grow well for the next 10 years, which, paints a horrible picture there in terms of what is left after the battle, what is the landscape after.
Yeah, and in fact, I was trying to describe to a group I was talking to about the idea you'd erect a trophy, which is the idea of the tropion. The enemy turns at that point and flees. And this is the panoply of the leader of the other side, gashed and dripping with blood and all the rest of it. I mean, it's ghastly. There's no way to describe this. And what we tend to do, I think, now in the way that the ancient historians do, is sanitize it and start to raise it more as a sort of the honor and the glory. But all the people I talk to have actually been in warfare. There's not much glory.
Well, even from the they become red and blue blocks on a map. They're not men.
Yes.
They're not individuals or families. They're squares and half squares for cavalry and things like that to tell you strategically or tactically what happens in the battle. But it sort of loses its humanity, and that obviously was when John Keegan wrote Face of Battle. Adding that story back into warfare was something that he wanted to do. And, he's not looking at ancient battles. And there has been a movement since to try and do a Face of Ancient Battle in Roman and Greek.
Okay. It's very well, one of we sort of mentioned, I think, in the build up to this about the Battle of Hastings, and I was reminded that Dan Snow actually stands in front of a group of modern grenadiers, I think they are, hussars or whatever. And he stands there as they charge, and he's really amazed at the vibrations in the ground as these come. It's terrifying, I think, is what he was trying to say. And we're talking. I mean, just to reflect on the numbers of people that we were talking about with the naval battles, and I mean, multiple tens of thousands of people. So it's noisy and it's just smelly and all that sort of stuff. But yet we look back at it as being glorious and all the other sorts of things. So I think what we do is that this is the sanitization bit with the squares and the little the boxes and all the rest of it. We study it for, I think, the tactical value and the strategy that we can learn that you do these things, you might get those results under those circumstances. But we as historians have to be mindful of all the other things that go on, the personal stories, the generalship, and all the rest of it.
If we can, yeah. It's true. We tend to get stuck in discussions about the numbers as pure numbers. Are they too high? Are they too low? Are they completely made up or realistic? Instead of the impact that might have, although that's being done more and more to try to calculate what the impact was on an army and a society after long-going wars. But that's an entirely different topic that we will exactly discuss in another podcast. Thank you very much for your contributions, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.